This young doctor was obsessed with the boundary between life and death. Therefore, Victor embarked on gruesome experiments to recreate life from corpses. His laboratory was always gloomy and cold. Even the stench of decaying bodies was enough to send shivers down one's spine. Today, a terrifying lightning bolt suddenly struck, bringing Victor's test subject back to life. But it was like a sensitive and vulnerable newborn baby. Both curious and frightened of its surroundings, Victor decided to name it Adam. But the achievements of science couldn't be arbitrarily attributed to religious names. Victor conveniently grabbed a Shakespeare play and told the test subject to choose its own name, and it chose Pluto, a coincidence that astonished even science. A man who had been a sailor in life had coincidentally chosen the name of a sea god from a book. Victor happily recorded everything that happened that night. At the same time, Ethan woke up and found himself sleeping with some rats. Not far away, he could hear the sound of sailors setting sail. Ethan felt pain all over his body. He also had a wound on his hand. This happened about once every 4 or 5 weeks. Each time he woke up, he couldn't remember what had happened the night before. He dragged himself into a pub and ordered a bottle of whiskey. A woman approached and looked him up and down. Then she took the bottle and poured herself a glass. They exchanged a few simple words. The woman's name was Lily, a prostitute at this dock. She used to work in a textile factory, but that job was later replaced by machines, so she couldn't find any other work. To survive, she was forced to become a prostitute. Lily had recently landed a modeling job. After saying goodbye to Ethan, she went to a high-end villa. She rang the doorbell and went upstairs. Tall, slender figure stood in front of a wall covered in paintings. When the person turned around, Lily saw a handsome young man. He had a radiant aura and incredibly captivating eyes. This man's name was Dorian. He had invited Lily to do some photo shoots. But after Lily posed in a few rather boring ways, Dorian seemed a little tired and asked her to take off her coat. When the tight coat was loosened, her breathing became much easier. Immediately afterward, she suddenly spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. This was the consequence of pulmonary tuberculosis from years of working in the textile factory. Dorian slowly stood up and asked Lily if it was blood. Lily nodded and asked if she needed to leave, but he said that if she didn't want to leave, she didn't have to. Then he approached her. Then he licked the blood still clinging to her lips and uttered horrifying words. He said he had never experienced the pleasure of being with a dying person. That statement left her completely blank, unsure whether it was fear or horror. Outside, the sound of approaching horse hooves grew louder. Vanessa and Sir Malcolm disembarked from the carriage. Today was Friday, the day Lyle had promised to help them translate the ancient Egyptian script. The opulent mansion bustled with officials and nobles. Sir Malcolm and Lyle quickly went to the study. Vanessa, however, went alone to the lavishly decorated drawing room, filled with elements from all over the world. As everyone was chatting and laughing, a figure suddenly appeared behind Vanessa, emanating an indescribable sense of mystery. Vanessa turned around and saw a handsome young man walking towards her. He was the one who had taken Lily's photograph. He seemed to have seen through Vanessa's thoughts from the very first moment. She felt lost in her surroundings, but couldn't bring herself to leave immediately. She always carried within her a vague sense of wariness that made her withdraw. Meanwhile, in the living room, the hostess was enthusiastically leading the guests into the entertainment. Mrs. Colley would present them with a world of terrifying and mysterious spirits. She selected 8 slightly braver guests to sit down. She asked them to remove all their jewelry, place their hands on the table, and let their imaginations run wild in the dark space where souls wandered to an ancient ocean. The sun soared high into the clouds. Ancient gods roamed the earth, summoning the mother of the mud gods, summoning death. Mrs. Colley merely twitched slightly. Everyone around held their breath. Not long after, a gruff voice echoed through the hall. Who has summoned me? I am the god of the underworld, the ruler of life and the essence of all things. What do you rats want with me? Oh, no, there's also a high god, Amun-Ra, here. Immediately, Vanessa's expression turned serious. Suddenly, her whole body convulsed. The lights in the room went out instantly. Vanessa stormed off in the rain and wind. This wasn't the first time she'd lost control. Although she was always careful in everything she did, she still lost herself because of certain people or events. A mysterious force had been tormenting her since childhood. The time she was possessed at Lyle's house was due to the accusations of Malcolm's 2 children that his son had accompanied him on an expedition to Africa. It would be more accurate to call it an invasion. It was the height of the British Industrial Revolution. They came to Africa, killing, robbing, and committing all sorts of atrocities. During that time, Malcolm's son contracted the plague and died in Africa. His daughter, in London, was abducted by a mysterious force. The misfortunes his children suffered seemed to be his way of atoning for his past sins. The next day, Malcolm went alone to Lyle's mansion. First, to apologize for what happened the previous night. Second, to obtain Lyle's translation. Lyle told him it was a spell about Amun-Ra. He needed to tell a short story. According to Egyptian mythology, the sun god Amun-Ra was hermaphrodite. Aphrodite. But when two divine natures coexist, disaster strikes. During a feast of the gods, both divine natures of Amun-Ra simultaneously manifested. He then sent a bloodthirsty lion to destroy humankind. The lion beast descended to the human world, beginning a massacre, devouring and tearing apart humanity. In an instant, the world turned into hell. Blood flowed like rivers across the land. Amun-Ra discovered this and ordered wine to be poured into the wheat stalks. The lion beast couldn't distinguish between blood and wine and quickly became intoxicated. Afterward, Amun-Ra bestowed a spell upon humanity, instructing them to divide it into two parts for safekeeping. These included Amun-Ra and Amun-Ed. Only by separating the two parts would disaster be averted. Then, Amun-Ra returned to the divine realm, concealing the female divine essence of the sun god and sending it down to the human world. This divine essence coincidentally entered Vanessa, corresponding to the spell depicted in the photograph Malcolm brought. Lyle accidentally discovered that someone had deliberately combined the two parts of the spell. If the hidden divine essence within Vanessa were seized by other forces, humanity would face a catastrophe. Lyle advised Malcolm not to tell Vanessa the truth to avoid her having suicidal thoughts. After a brief encounter, Ethan felt that Lily was very special, a prostitute with a terminal illness, yet she exuded honesty in her interactions. Therefore, as evening approached, he invited her out for dinner. She smiled and told him that she just shouldn't treat her like a rich girl. On the way, they met Dr. Victor. Beside him was a young man who didn't seem very bright. His name was Brutu. This was Brutu's first time outside. Thanks to Victor's help, he saw the blue sky and white clouds, magnificent architecture, and enjoyed delicious food for the first time. Brutu was gradually adapting. He even gave Lily the chestnuts he had just bought. Victor worried that talking too much would reveal Brutu's true identity, so he quickly took Brutu back. When they arrived at the laboratory, Brutu was still very excited. He hoped to go out more and make more friends in the future. But just as Brutu was speaking, a hand suddenly pierced through his chest, then quickly tore his body in two. A man with a terrifying face appeared before Victor and said, "My firstborn son has returned, father." Victor immediately recalled his youth. He was born into an aristocratic family and often reflected his mood on meadows, forests, and rivers. He sought peace in nature, but because of this, he became lonely. Others could hardly enter his world. The only person who cared about him was Katerina, but she died of illness when Victor was young. From that day on, he began to study the mysteries of the human body. This monster was the first artificial human Victor created. When he awoke on the operating table, his heart was filled with grief and fear. He snarled and screamed, hoping for some solace. But Victor was terrified by the sight and fled. Afterward, the monster climbed out the upstairs window to explore the outside world. He learned from the books in the house. From notes and clues in Victor's books, he discovered that Victor loved classical romantic literature. Unexpectedly, they shared a common interest. Both enjoyed capturing beautiful moments and feeling the joy and mystery within them. However, Victor refused to take any responsibility. Therefore, Victor abandoned him for many long years. The monster, with its deformed face, wandered among the crowds, but received only the treatment of a rat scurrying across the street. Everyone shunned him. No one treated him kindly or accepted him. All that pain stemmed from Victor's irresponsibility. Therefore, he was determined to find Victor and take revenge. That day, as he was walking down the street, several passers-by saw him and immediately ganged up to beat him up simply because of his ugly face. He cowered in a corner, recalling the cruel faces of the people. Just then, an elderly man appeared and gave him a small bottle of wine. Then the man led the monster to a horror theater he managed. The man even kindly gave him some manual labor backstage. This was the first time in his life the monster had felt kindness from another person. Therefore, he worked incredibly hard. He used his free time to read books. He even gave himself a name, John. One day, John accidentally discovered Victor. Therefore, John began secretly observing Victor, waiting for an opportunity for revenge. When John realized Victor had created another life form, he was filled with immense grief and rage, so he cruelly killed Brutus. He demanded that Victor create a bride for him, threatening to kill all of Victor's relatives and friends if he refused. After dinner, Ethan and Lily enjoyed some happy moments together. This time, Ethan seemed to have no intention of just having fun. He wanted to earn some money to pay for Lily's medical treatment, so he thought of Malcolm. Ever since Vanessa lost control at Lyle's house, Mina's voice had been echoing in her ears, causing her to panic. She and Malcolm relied on her vague memories to track Mina's whereabouts on a map. They realized it might be at the London Zoo, so they decided to go there together. The night was dark and windy, the surroundings silent except for the gentle rustling of leaves on the ground. Ethan asked Vanessa if this was the right place. Vanessa said it was probably correct. The four of them slowly made their way into the center of the park, when suddenly, several dark figures appeared around them. It looked like a pack of wolves. Malcolm immediately raised his gun, ready to shoot, but Ethan quickly stopped Malcolm and slowly advanced towards the pack alone. One wolf also slowly approached him. He slowly slowly sat down and extended his right hand. Then he closed his 5 fingers and held them forward, staring intently at the alpha wolf. The alpha wolf gently nibbled Ethan's finger and then turned and walked away. Vanessa and Malcolm looked at each other. They felt something strange, but this wasn't the time to discuss it. Their top priority was still finding Mina's whereabouts. They went around the zoo and finally only caught a boy who ate a live rabbit named Fenton. Malcolm tried to use a whip to force Fenton to reveal Mina's whereabouts, but this method proved completely ineffective. His close friends often called Victor the mad scientist. His first appearance was in Mary's writings. In that book, Victor was portrayed as a hypocrite, almost embodying every archetype of the leaders who caused Mary's suffering. In British horror, the image of the mad scientist has undergone significant changes. In the initial setting, it was quite close to the original source material. Victor fled immediately after creating the first artificial human. However, in the third installment of British horror, he showed new awareness and maturity when he decided to use Fenton as a test subject to research methods for restoring vampires. He once told Malcolm that there was something he needed to think carefully about. Transforming a life form was giving it a new lease on life. Whatever happened to the creature in the basement was their responsibility and a burden. Their every action was inextricably linked. That bond was an eternal chain. Early the next morning, Vanessa sat absent-mindedly outside the church. From a distance, she saw Dorian emerge from inside. He wore a dark blue cloak paired with a light gray patterned scarf. She still remembered their first meeting. With just a glance, Dorian had seen through Vanessa's thoughts. Now, seeing him emerge from the church, she became even more suspicious that this man was hiding some secret. So, she unconsciously followed him to the greenhouse. Dew still clung to the flower buds. Dorian's eyes were slightly closed. He breathed in the scent of life. Vanessa stood beside him, shyly greeting him. He turned in return and seemed surprised to learn that she also enjoyed studying biology. She awkwardly explained that her only research on plants was finding ways to kill them. He smiled. They strolled and chatted. He introduced her to 2 unusual flowers. One was the datura, intensely fragrant but deadly. The other was the Paphiopedilum rocinianum, a slipper orchid that blooms only once every 10 years or so. Then he said goodbye. He said he would be going to the horror theater that evening. Victor had successfully given Fenton a blood transfusion, but it hadn't been effective. Fenton still wouldn't eat apples. It only ate blood and meat. To ensure the white mouse continued to cooperate with the research, the butler had killed a kitten for it to eat. That evening, the area outside the horror theater was crowded. Lily stood at the ticket counter excitedly. She had always wanted to see a horror play, but due to financial constraints, she had to cut back on entertainment expenses. Ethan bought tickets and took Lily to the theater. The spacious, bright hall delighted her. Seeing Lily happy filled Ethan with a sense of accomplishment. They sat near the center. Ethan bought Lily an orange, hoping the horror play would bring her more joy. John was backstage, skillfully operating the props. 5 minutes later, fireworks erupted in front of the stage. The curtains slowly rose, and the horror play officially began. A 15-year-old girl waited for her lover to return on a dark, windy night. But that night, her lover was possessed by a demon. Despite his efforts to resist, he could not overcome the demon's power. Malcolm and Victor were busy downstairs when they suddenly heard a noise upstairs. They immediately followed the sound to Vanessa's room. A monster with red eyes and white teeth suddenly appeared in the room. At that moment, Fenton jumped out from nowhere and climbed onto Malcolm's head. It muttered, "Master, she's not here." Then it broke through the window and fled. Victor was so frightened that his whole body trembled. Malcolm grabbed Fenton and threw him forcefully, causing his head to hit the glass and kill him instantly. In the theater, Dorian was watching a horror play on the second floor when he suddenly noticed Vanessa sitting opposite him. The two exchanged smiles and continued watching the play. On stage, the girl hoped her lover could use the power of love to defeat the demon, but in the end, the demon tore through her lover's skin and emerged. With a single claw, it ended the girl's life. The gentlemen applauded, while the ladies screamed in fear. When the first horror play ended, Vanessa went to the bar to order a drink. She happened to see Ethan and Lily nearby, so she approached them politely. Ethan respectfully introduced Lily to him. Lily felt a little intimidated by Vanessa's aristocratic demeanor. Soon after, Dorian arrived. Just 2 days ago, he had been taking pictures of Lily, and now they met again in this situation. The world was small. Dorian greeted them and then began discussing the play. Lily, feeling the air in the room growing thinner, turned to Ethan as if signaling for help. Ethan was still enthusiastically discussing the play. Lily took 2 steps back and then turned and ran out of the theater. She had to work hard in the textile factory to survive, but she didn't feel sad at all. Later, despite being forced into prostitution, she could still laugh heartily. However, a simple conversation was enough to break her last line of defense. She understood that she couldn't blame Ethan, but she also didn't know who else to blame. She pushed his hand away and staggered off. Then, her lung disease relapsed. Ethan stood there bewildered, going from not understanding what was happening to feeling helpless. corpse. Then, an unknown fire gradually flared up, making him want to escape from everything before him. At this moment, Dorian also chased after him and saw Ethan in a daze, so Dorian took him to an interesting place. It was clearly an illegal establishment. As soon as Dorian appeared, the receptionist politely invited them both inside. Downstairs, they found the place incredibly noisy and bustling. In a pit were over 100 rats. The dealer held up a small hunting dog. Everyone took turns choosing their predicted numbers and placing bets. Someone was calculating how many rats a hunting dog could kill in a minute. The scene became so bloody that Ethan felt nauseated. While at the bar drinking, he got into a fight with 3 Englishmen. Then Ethan went to Dorian's mansion. This time, Dorian guessed the number correctly again, 97. But for him, the game had become too boring. After returning home, he mixed absinthe and put on Wagner's opera Tristan and Isolde, the quintessential ending to a love story. Ethan listened to the opera and drank absinthe as if he were being led to the guillotine by an irreversible fate. Ethan is like an executioner of that era. His hands are stained with fresh blood, but deep down, a glimmer of goodness still remains. Ethan wanted to do something, but he couldn't change anything. Dorian's prototype originated from the character in Oscar Wilde's Portrait of Dorian. This is also a typical product of the Victorian era, representing extreme hedonism. More than 10 years ago, Vanessa's family and Mina's family were close friends for generations. Mina also had a younger brother named Peter. The 3 children often played together on the beach or in a large garden. They were fascinated by strange specimens. The 3 had a very good relationship. Mina was gentle, Vanessa was wilder, and Peter had a somewhat feminine personality. One night, Malcolm returned from Africa, and the 2 families had dinner together. He told them about his experiences in Africa. The story was so vivid that both adults and children listened intently. After dinner, the 3 children continued playing together. Vanessa went into the garden maze, and in the dim light of the night, she gradually heard heavy breathing. Curious, she followed the sound, and she witnessed Malcolm having an affair with her mother. From that moment, the seeds of evil began to sprout in Vanessa's heart. When it was time for marriage, Mina became engaged to the handsome Captain Branson, and she went to India. Meanwhile, Peter was going with his father to Africa on an expedition. At this time, Vanessa was extremely conflicted. She forcibly kissed Peter, hoping he wouldn't leave but would stay and marry her. But Peter refused, because pursuing the expedition to Africa was his dream. Later, at Mina's bachelorette party, Vanessa slept with her fiancé. Mina found out. Heartbroken, Mina decided to leave town. Vanessa, meanwhile, fell seriously ill. The illness was so sudden that all the doctors in the area were baffled, believing her brain was damaged. Vanessa's parents finally decided to take her to a psychiatric hospital in London for treatment. There, she endured all kinds of torture: water therapy, cryotherapy, brain surgery, and even solitary confinement. Only when Vanessa completely gave up resisting did her parents bring her home. That very night, Vanessa's mother saw her possessed by a demon. She died on the spot from anger. From that moment on, Vanessa began to have psychic abilities and saw visions of Mina on the beach. Mina told Vanessa that Peter had died in Africa and that Mina was being held captive by a demon. Mina hoped Vanessa would come to her rescue, so Vanessa sought out Malcolm. At first, he intended to kill her to vent his anger, but in the end, he gave her a chance to stay. Then, the 2 began their journey to rescue Mina. During this time, they follow clues to the London Zoo based on the vision Vanessa sees. There, they capture a henchman named Fenton. They plan to extract information about Mina's whereabouts and a cure for her mutation. However, they are instead discovered by a monster that finds Vanessa's whereabouts. The monster comes to abduct her at night but finds Vanessa absent. Fenton helps the monster escape and engages in a fight with Malcolm, but the monster is accidentally killed by Malcolm. After some time, the vision of Mina disappears. This greatly worries Malcolm and leads to conflict with Vanessa. Later, Vanessa uses dominoes to sense a murder on a ship. She believes Mina might be there. At this time, Dorian visits Vanessa. He apologizes for leaving the horror theater without saying goodbye the night before and hopes she will accept his dinner invitation. Malcolm hadn't intended to act with Vanessa that evening, so he seized the opportunity to urge her to accept the date. Vanessa happily changed her clothes and left with Dorian. Sembene reminded Malcolm that if they found Mina and she had transformed into a monster, he needed to think carefully about what he would do. Meanwhile, Ethan left Dorian's house and returned to his small pub. Lily's condition worsened. Her pillow was covered in blood. He opened the window to let a ray of sunlight in, then he embraced her, hoping to alleviate some of her pain. At this moment, Vanessa was a guest at Dorian's house. Dorian took a commemorative portrait of Vanessa. Afterwards, they went to an Italian restaurant for a meal. He told her about his experiences and insights over the years: Fabianism, transcendentalism, utilitarianism, aestheticism, socialism. He only liked each ideology a little. He was always searching for eternal and new joy. She offered no comment on these things. She felt he carried within him a mystery and loneliness similar to her own. If 2 people destined to endure eternal loneliness were to come together, would that feeling feeling of loneliness still exists? This thought led Vanessa to Dorian's mansion once more late at night. They appreciated art together and shared their loneliness. Meanwhile, Malcolm, Sembene and Ethan went to the docks to find a ship that had been temporarily detained due to the epidemic. They descended the stairs to the cargo hold, where goods were piled high and rats scurried underfoot. Several infected women appeared. They had white hair and fingernails so long it was clear they hadn't been trimmed in a long time. Ethan slowly drew his pistol and prepared for battle. Malcolm examined the more than 20 corpses, but none were Mina's. As they prepared to leave, all the female corpses suddenly opened their eyes. They ferociously attacked Malcolm and everyone else. In the ensuing chaos, oil lamps fell to the ground, causing fire to spread throughout the hold. Ethan fired 2 shots in quick succession, successfully taking down 2 of the monsters behind Malcolm. At this moment, the fire raged even more fiercely. The masts supporting the ship began to collapse. Through the flames, Malcolm saw a towering monster. It was the same creature that had come to find him late at night the last time. In its arms was a woman, Mina. Malcolm called out her name and immediately rushed into the sea of fire. Ethan and Sembene rushed forward to pull him back. The fire was too intense for them to cross. They could only watch as Mina was carried away by the monster. Malcolm was filled with regret. He thought that if Vanessa had been there this time, they might have been able to save Mina. Meanwhile, as Vanessa was sharing her loneliness with Dorian, her soul was once again possessed by a demon. This time it seemed even more serious than before. When Malcolm saw Vanessa, she was in a dazed and exhausted state. At the same time, she was being lifted into the air by an invisible force. At this moment, Dorian returned to the secret chamber and looked in the mirror, observing him. The blood stains on his body were gradually disappearing. The next day, Malcolm and Sembene changed Vanessa's clothes. Then they made tea and observed her condition. They worried she would lose control again, but the person who woke up was no longer Vanessa. Using Mina's voice, she recounted how Malcolm's wife had cried all night. She couldn't sleep while he was away, while he was in Africa, doing whatever he wanted. Then she told of the cruel acts he had committed in Africa. Malcolm had forced Peter to humiliate women to prove he was a man. The expedition Peter had dreamed of had become a lifelong nightmare. Then the plague claimed his life. The teacup on the table suddenly flew to the ceiling in a fit of rage. Then everything in the room flew around. Malcolm stood in the middle of the room, his hands and feet trembling in terror. Then Vanessa was knocked unconscious, which prevented the commotion in the room. By afternoon, she seemed much more stable. Malcolm invited Victor to check on Vanessa. Her pulse was steady and strong, her heart rate normal. However, she had no memory of what had happened that morning. Victor hoped Vanessa could eat something to regain her strength, and also to check if her stomach was functioning properly. At this moment, Vanessa suddenly grabbed Victor's hand and hummed his favorite lines from Shelley's Agonizing. Unforgettable from the mind, the substance that can unite us, let not life separate us. This very line of poetry was proof of Victor's secret about creating new life, something he had never told anyone before, and now Vanessa had revealed it. Therefore, he was a little frightened. Being an atheist, Victor went to the study to analyze the cause of Vanessa's illness with Malcolm. Just then, a swarm of spiders crawled out from beneath the dominoes on the table, covering the entire study. Immediately afterward, Vanessa's agonizing screams echoed down from upstairs. By the time Ethan arrived, it was late at night. Vanessa was huddled in the corner of the bed, her hands clutching her knees, her body swaying back and forth, moaning in pain. Although they had known each other for a long time, this was the first time Ethan had seen the usually elegant Vanessa in such a state. She tried to utter a few words of apology, saying that she was acting a little out of character. Ethan took her hand sympathetically, hoping she would feel his warmth and support. She slowly lifted her head and said that it had been a long time since she had felt such a warm hand. Then, she asked him a question. That night, between him and Dorian, who had slept with whom, Ethan was instantly frightened and quickly pulled his hand away from Vanessa. Vanessa, with a ferocious expression on her face, twisted her body and crawled towards Ethan. She mumbled about Dorian sleeping with Lily. Then her whole body went into a frenzy. Malcolm and everyone else worked together to restrain Vanessa and give her a sedative injection. Afterwards, they gathered in the library to discuss how to save Vanessa. Ethan wanted to call a priest. Victor, however, mocked them, suggesting they call a witch instead. Malcolm said that this wasn't Vanessa's first time. As long as they ensured she stayed alive so she could fight with her will, that would be enough. For over a month, Vanessa remained in this state of torment. One day, when Vanessa regained consciousness, she told Ethan, who was sitting beside her bed, that if she ever started harming others, he should kill her. Ethan replied, "Should I take her to heaven? Dream on." Orai's eyes turned pitch black. Meanwhile, Ethan was downstairs talking to Malcolm, his hand caressing the cross pendant Lily had given him. Soon after, Vanessa's screams echoed from upstairs. Ethan and Malcolm rushed in. They found Victor slammed against the wall, and Vanessa clawing at plaster, a mark of the combined Amun-Ra Amun-Ra and Amun-Ra appeared on her chest. Vanessa screamed in pain, clawing at the blood on her arms. Ethan and the others quickly restrained her and injected her with a sedative. This continued for another month, leaving everyone helpless. Seeing Vanessa's health deteriorating, Malcolm went to her bedside and asked her to search for Mina. Just then, Ethan woke up and witnessed the scene. He pulled Malcolm out of the room and demanded that he immediately summon a priest. If Vanessa wanted to die, let her soul rest in peace. Malcolm still hadn't found any clues about Mina, so naturally, he refused to stop. Victor angrily said that Mina was dying, yet Malcolm was still trying to exploit her. He bluntly pointed out that Malcolm had killed people from Africa to the New World. Those words struck Malcolm's deepest sore spot. Malcolm grabbed Victor by the collar and pushed him against the wall. Ethan, standing beside him, reminded him that he wanted a daughter, right? The girl desperately waiting to be rescued in that room. Malcolm was momentarily speechless, released Victor, and went downstairs. Shortly after, a priest arrived to perform the final prayers for Vanessa. As he was reciting the prayers, Vanessa, who had been gasping for breath, suddenly sprang up. She grabbed the priest by the head and bit a piece of flesh from his face. Then, she leaped to the ceiling and lunged straight at Malcolm. The window panes shattered. Victor and Malcolm ran outside. Ethan pulled out his pistol and pointed it at Vanessa. Vanessa, now calmer, slowly advanced towards the muzzle of the gun. Ethan grabbed her head with one hand, pressed her against the wall, and repeatedly called her name. For a brief moment, Vanessa regained consciousness, and he told Ethan to shoot her. Ethan suddenly remembered the pendant Saint Lily had given him, so he performed an exorcism on Vanessa. When Vanessa woke up, images of Mina and the horror theater flashed through her mind. In the quiet office, she recounted those images to Malcolm. The two planned to go to the horror theater tonight to investigate. This time, Malcolm was determined to save his daughter. If they couldn't save her body, they had to save her soul. John worked at the horror theater, but he was fired today. There were two people in the theater who treated John very well. One was his boss, the other a young woman who often chatted with him and offered comforting words that made him feel incredibly warm. That day, while the theater was rehearsing a new play, a magical rope suddenly trapped the young woman's boyfriend, leaving him suspended in midair. John frantically tried to resolve the situation, but the boyfriend angrily unleashed a torrent of vulgar insults. John tried to apologize, but he wouldn't accept it. He hurled all his insults at John before taking the young woman out of the theater. John quietly repaired the props and then returned to his study. A while later, the young woman came to visit John with an orange and apologized for her boyfriend's rudeness. Before leaving, she gently kissed his forehead and hoped he could live a happier life. For the first time, a smile appeared on John's face. He combed his hair, applied eyeliner and eyebrow pencil, put on blush and lipstick, then took an orange to the dressing room to find the young woman. The girl, mending clothes, looked in the mirror and saw his appearance and burst out laughing. She wondered why he had made himself look like that. John, somewhat flustered, prepared a performance to confess his feelings, but the result was so clumsy that he lost control and forcibly kissed the young woman. She screamed in fright. Only then did he realize his impulsive behavior. Afterwards, the boss called John in for a talk and fired him. Before leaving, the boss told John to remember the people and moments he had helped, the things that had warmed his heart, so that his inner self could become richer. After John left the theater, he had nowhere else to go, so he returned to his birthplace, Victor's laboratory. Not long after, Victor also returned. Lately, Victor had been taking care of Vanessa so much that he barely had any rest. As soon as he arrived home, he saw John. Victor's already bad mood worsened. He silently pulled out his pistol, preparing to deal with John, but he was stunned when he heard John speak. John said he had once dreamed of having a life partner, someone who could look into his face without fear. But how could that be? Because the devil wasn't on John's face, but in his soul. He used to think that if he were like everyone else, he would be happy, then someone would love him, but malice had spread from within. This shattered face only reflected the ugliness in his soul, and from then on, John began to blame the person who created him. Why didn't Victor give John a heart of stone? Why let him have emotions? John would rather be a killing machine than a human being filled with hurt and pain. He said he was tired of life. He wanted to die, because for him, that was liberation. Sometimes we carelessly say, we should live without worries, but who can truly do that? Those emotions bring us emotion and surprise, but also worry and sadness. There was a knock at the door. It was Ethan's voice. Since saving Vanessa, Ethan had been by Lily's side, praying for her every day, and now he came to find Victor. Lily must be dying. Victor told John to wait at home while he accompanied Ethan to the small pub. Ethan's gentleness made Lily, lying in bed, seem more comfortable, but illness is incredibly cruel. Even breathing was painful for her. Victor injected Lily with some sedatives to alleviate her pain. When asked how she was doing, Lily said her physical condition had improved, but when Victor inquired about her mental state, she admitted to hating God for his cruelty. She then confessed that she was extremely frightened. Realizing time was running out, Victor asked Ethan again to fetch a bucket of clean water at the end of the hallway. Ethan returned and promised Lily he would be back soon. When they were alone, Victor told Lily that he knew of a place that was neither heaven nor hell, a place between life and death. Victor described it as a wonderful place where Lily could be reborn and eternally saved. He asked if she believed in such a place, adding that reaching it would come at a price. He emphasized that everything has a price, but for her, this price was actually very small. Then Victor worried about Lily. Ethan went to a pub to drink. Outside, two men from America, sent by Ethan's father, were there to take him back. Ethan wiped away the tears from the corners of his eyes and quickly subdued both of them before leaving the pub. Meanwhile, Malcolm went to a gun shop to buy a newly released pistol. There, he met Kali again, the woman who had performed the psychic ritual at Lyle's house before. They exchanged a few simple words. Kali inquired about Vanessa's situation. Malcolm replied that Vanessa was a friend of his daughter and that he wasn't particularly close to her. At this moment, Vanessa was at home using dominoes to calculate Dorian's past and future lives. This man had no future, but countless pasts. When Dorian visited, Vanessa rejected his love. For the first time in his life, Dorian experienced the feeling of being rejected. Time passed quickly. Soon it was dark. Malcolm, Vanessa, Ethan, Victor, and Sembini went to the horror theater. This time the situation was slightly different from on the plague ship. The number of white-haired ghosts had doubled. Although Malcolm and the others were brave and skilled fighters, they couldn't overcome the overwhelming numbers. At this moment, a large monster jumped out and attacked Vanessa. It seemed both eager to possess her and somewhat hesitant to approach. Immediately afterward, Malcolm unexpectedly stabbed it through the heart, causing it to fall from the second floor. Ethan, Victor, and Sembene were instantly surrounded by the white-haired ghosts. Malcolm quickly rushed downstairs and stabbed the monster in the heart again until it was dead. At this point, the white-haired ghosts began to fall, one by one. From a dark corner of the theater, a voice rang out. Seeing Mina, Vanessa happily embraced her. But at that moment, Mina unexpectedly grabbed Vanessa's neck and said, "Thank you, Father, for bringing Vanessa to me. The Master will surely be very happy. There's no need to rush. You will all soon join the Master's army, and together, we will create a new world." After saying this, she bared her fangs and bit Vanessa's neck. In this desperate situation, Malcolm was forced to shoot and kill Mina. The innocent, pure, and lovely girl of yesteryear died right before the eyes of her guilty father. After they returned, Malcolm packed his belongings and decided to go to Africa to visit his deceased son. Victor took Lily's body back to the laboratory and began creating a bride for John. The two Americans Ethan had beaten up at the bar came looking for him again. This time, things were no longer simple. On that full moon night, Ethan revealed his true fangs, and Vanessa sat outside the church. Following Mina's death, this is the first time Vanessa has entered a church to seek an exorcism from a priest. What will Vanessa's fate be? Why did Ethan flee America? What kind of bride will Victor create for John? Why did Callie deliberately go to the gun shop to meet Malcolm? Who is the mastermind chasing Vanessa? All these questions will be answered in Season 2. This part ends here. If you're looking forward to Season 2, don't forget to leave a comment below. Goodbye, and see you again.